Taylor Haney, Singletrack surgeon, coming at you with another video, and today I want to talk about CushCore. So at this point, if you haven't heard about CushCore, you're probably living under a rock of some kind. They are tire inserts that are designed to protect your rim and help with rolling resistance and a couple other things. They claim a lot of things on their website. I'm going to boil it down to the two things that they help you with. So the first is your vertical impacts, where it protects your rim and your tire as well from vertical impacts from rock strikes. So it's going to prevent, in most cases, your tire from tearing. If you go over a rock and hit it, normally what would happen is the tire would go compress all the way to the rim and it would tear a hole in the tire and possibly crack your rim, and then your tire goes flat and you have nothing. So the CushCore basically sits in between there on top of the rim, and it has the ability to protect against that, protects from punctures, protects your rim. If you have carbon rims, it's a great way to protect your investment. So that's the first primary goal of CushCore. The secondary thing is, because of its shape, it's going to help with turning and resistance in the tire rolling sideways. And I'll talk about that a little bit later, but those are the two primary goals and functions of CushCore. All right, so if you've never seen CushCore, this is what it looks like. They have a very interesting shape that allows it to sit really well and really tight on the rim. And the density of the foam is different than any other insert that I've seen. It's much denser than a lot of the competition, which allows it to actually function better in keeping your tire in place, and I think it does a little bit better job at protecting your rim as well. And the biggest knock I've heard is people say, well man, I could just cut a pool noodle in half and stick it in my tire and call it quits. Well, I mean, if I push as hard as I can't even compress this foam halfway through. So I'd say this is a little bit higher quality than your average pool noodle. Now, the design of the actual shape, I think, is what puts it ahead of the competition. It's got this ridge, these two ridges that actually protrude from the insert itself, and that's actually what sits in the rim, and that's what gives it that really, really tight fit. And it's also what allows the CushCore to keep your tire from rolling, because this piece is going to stay in place. And with that ridge there, you can see it's actually like a wedge. Coming from the part that seats on the rim, it's got kind of a curve and then it stops. So basically this is what creates, from here on up, is what creates the air volume in your tire, and actually reduces the air volume quite a bit in your tire, which I'll talk about a little bit later in the performance, but it's a big part of why these work so well. Now, weight, there are a lot of weight weenies out there that are saying, man, I don't want to stick that thing in my tire, it's going to add a lot of weight. And I was skeptical too at first, but one of these guys, one insert, is 295 grams. That's not that bad. A normal tube that you grab off of the, I grabbed a tube off the shelf back there, 250 grams. These are 295. It's not much more than an actual tube, and it's going to really protect your tire, and in my opinion, it actually improves your bike's performance quite a bit. Now, one of the cool things with CushCore is they design their own valves, because they figured out very quickly that normal valves don't work very well. Because, as I explained, they've got that ridge that sits in the rim. Now, what that would do is that would block the valve. So what they did is they came up with their own valves that actually exit the air on the side of the valve. So that allows it to actually sit on top of the CushCore and still be able to blow air into the tire. So pretty cool. And I actually did weigh, for those weight weenies, I weighed this versus our normal standard one. This is 3 grams lighter. So this was 12 grams, the standard one we had in shop. With the cap, both of them with the cap on, this was 12 grams, standard one was 15. So you drop a whopping 3 grams, and maybe that would even make up for me weighing this with the cardboard.
I'm an idiot! You're an idiot!
So it would be absolutely impossible to talk performance without actually showing you what it looks like on a rim. Because I feel like visually you get a better idea of what's happening. Now, the two claims that they make, and I would say are the two reasons why you probably should run CushCore, is that obviously it protects your rim. Check. It doesn't really matter how hard I throw this thing. The rim's totally protected because the high density foam works so well. But the other thing that they talk about is the lateral stiffness and keeping your tire from rolling. And as you can see, because this is seated on here, it really keeps the tire from rolling. That holds the bead of the tire into the rim really well, and ironically, that's what makes it so incredibly hard to install. And I'll actually be doing an installation video to show you guys how I put them on. Saves me a little bit of time. Hopefully it will save you guys some time as well. But that's what makes them so hard to install, is this ridge here sits so tightly and pushes the tire actually onto the bead of the rim. And without actually talking about how I install them, you have to actually work the tire into the bead. So as you're installing each side of the tire, you really have to pull this out of the way and allow that tire to seat correctly, so that you get all of the benefits of the CushCore. Now, the big thing that I noticed when I removed the CushCore, and this is, I think, separate from the actual performance, but noticing just what's the forensic evidence of what these things are actually doing. As I expected, when I pulled the CushCore from the rear, I mean, it was a pin cushion. I mean, there were holes everywhere, through and throughs, notches on top and on bottom, and I'll put some footage of what they look like when I pull them out on the video. But I mean, it was just destroyed, just slits all over the place. Rim's totally fine, but they really were absorbing a lot of impact. The weird difference, and I think this is where it gets into that debate of, do you run it in the rear or do you run it in both tires? There was a big difference in what marks were on the top as far as the folding of the tire. Let me try and explain that. So the rear, of course, it was absorbing more hits. So there were way more holes on the back. There were holes on the front, but there were way more on the back. However, on the front tire, there were these folds that basically started here and here, and they would fold, and it was basically a fold all the way down, all the way around the tire. So that told me that the CushCore was actually resisting a lot of the tire wanting to roll. And those really weren't present in the back, which really leads me to believe that when you're running them in front and the rear, they're actually helping you in different ways. Obviously, they're giving you the overall protection, but as far as that resistance to lateral movement on the tire, I think it works better in the front that way. And so that's kind of a question you got to ask yourself when you're thinking about running front or rear. Now, if I was to boil down the performance of CushCore into one word, it would be confidence. In my experience, the biggest thing that I gained from having these things installed was confidence. I knew that my rims weren't going to blow up if I went through a really difficult rock garden. The scenarios where my bike may feel out of control in other scenarios without the CushCore, I felt much more composed, which gave me more confidence. So let me get a little bit more into that. Now, running them in the front and the rear is different than running them just in the rear. Now, I ran them front and rear for the whole race season. I did one race at China Peak in California Enduro Series without them, and then I put them on for the rest of the season. And the biggest thing I noticed when going through really, really rocky sections is I didn't have the same deflections laterally that I normally had. So a lot of times when you hit a bump, it's not perfectly perpendicular to the riding that you're doing. You know, it will be angled, it will be maybe sticking up, maybe it's a round baby head or something. And without the CushCore installed, I would feel the bike, the front and the back tire kind of jumping left and right, little lateral deflections. And once I installed the CushCore, I didn't feel as much of that. It helped the bike hold its line more firm, and it allowed me to pick different lines that I wasn't doing before, because I had the confidence where I know I can hit this one rock line, and there's a couple really hard hits and weird, deflections in there, but I know the bike is going to hold. And that allowed me to kind of let off the brakes. It allowed me to roll through things. So whether it's faster or slower, I don't really know, but mentally I was more confident with the CushCore installed. Now, one of the biggest, I would say, misconceptions about air pressure in CushCore is that you hear a lot of people that say, man, I can run 18 PSI, I can run 10 PSI. You're just insane numbers. And yeah, I'm sure you could. I didn't choose to, and I'll explain why. As I mentioned earlier, having the CushCore insert installed on the rim reduces the amount of air volume in your tire. Now, if you think about that versus maybe a road bike, if some of you guys train on a road bike has much less air volume in that tire. So you have to pump the pressure way higher in order to hold that form, right? So by actually decreasing the amount of air, the same amount of pressure will feel significantly less. So instead of all those people that say, man, I can run my pressure super low, you can run the same pressure. Just being able to run the same amount of pressure that you ran before, they feel way more supple, because the reality is a 25 PSI is going to be cranked down 20 or 30%, and you're actually it's going to feel like 21 PSI even if you're running 25. So for reference, before the CushCore, I ran anywhere between 25, 26 PSI in the front, and then I ran 29 to 30 in the rear, depending on, of course, the size of the tire. So I was running a 2.5, 2.35 in the rear. Now with the CushCore installed, I run anywhere from 23 to 24 in the front and around 26, 27 in the rear. So I was able to drop the pressure a little bit, but actually how supple that feels is compounded greatly over actually how much you reduce. So as I said, the air volume being decreased makes the tire react differently too. So on CushCore's website, they talk about how you're basically turning your tire into an air spring. And I actually think that's a pretty good example of what it does, because now that smaller air volume is reacting like that initial impact. So that's going to be like your compression, that's going to be your initial, how soft and supple that fork is. And then basically the CushCore becomes your bottom out protection. So that allows it to really become more progressive in how you hit bumps, and it just controls the bike a little bit more. I really like a really progressive bike, and I feel like adding the CushCore allowed my fork and my shock to actually become more progressive, because the CushCore itself is actually taking the edge off of a lot of those hits that would compress my fork and shock before. Now, as far as it's worth it price-wise, everybody's in a different place financially, so I don't want to be one of those people that's like, man, you'd be stupid not to put it on, because I don't know where you're at financially. But that being said, I will say that a lot of people pay a lot of money to make their suspension feel better. They'll buy those shock whizzes, they'll invest a lot in upgrading their suspension components to make the bike feel better. This is not an expensive investment when you consider the difference of putting a different damper in a fork or changing out the shock. This is a fairly cheap investment. So if I'm going to say, is it worth it, the money? Absolutely, because I think the gains you get from adding the CushCore, I think they're just as good as maybe upgrading your fork or your shock, because let's be honest, the tires and your wheel are your first line of defense against bumps, braking bumps, rocks, rock gardens. So if you can make them feel even a little bit better, it's going to be easy on your suspension, it's going to be easier on your hands, it's going to be easier on your legs, it's going to be easier on your cranks. I mean, all of the benefits compound through the bike. And then it allows you to have more confidence and ride just more confidently and have more fun. So all things being considered, I think CushCore is a great addition to any bike, and any biker who is riding in any areas where there are rocks, are bumps, and maybe you just want a little bit of protection for your rims that you paid a lot of money for. I think they're a great investment. I think they're awesome. If you're worried about the struggle of getting them on, watch my installation video and I'll try and make that as easy as possible. As always, thank you so much for watching. I hope this introduction to CushCore kind of lets you know what it's all about, and hopefully it helped you make a decision on whether to put it on your bike. As always, I'll see you out on the trails. Later.